The crystal wine glass slipped from my fingers in slow motion, but instead of shattering against the marble floor of the Grand Astoria ballroom, it bounced once with a dull thud that somehow echoed louder than my racing heartbeat. There, under the gleaming chandeliers and surrounded by 300 of Seattle's most prominent guests, my younger sister, Celeste, had her manicured hands wrapped around my fiancé's neck, kissing him with the kind of passion that should have been reserved for wedding nights, not engagement parties. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. Conversations died. Even the waiters froze with their champagne trays suspended in mid-air. But what happened next would shock everyone in that room far more than the betrayal itself. I smiled. My name is Delilah Rothford, and I'm 31 years old. What you're about to hear is the story of how the worst night of my life became the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge I've ever orchestrated. Because while everyone in that ballroom thought they were witnessing my humiliation, they were actually watching the opening act of my sister's complete destruction. A destruction that would expose secrets so scandalous that her kiss with my fiancé would seem like child's play. But to understand why I smiled when I should have screamed, when I should have thrown that wine glass at their guilty faces, you need to know about the web of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that had been spinning around me for months. You need to know about Celeste's hidden life, about her desperate attempts to climb the social ladder, and about the married man she'd been secretly sleeping with. Her boss, the very same man whose wife was standing just 20 feet away from us, applauding what she thought was a romantic moment. The ballroom was decorated in my favorite colors, deep emerald and gold, with white peonies cascading from every table. I'd spent months planning this party, working with Seattle's most exclusive event planner to create the perfect evening. The guest list read like a who's who of the Pacific Northwest's elite: tech entrepreneurs, real estate moguls, politicians, and old money families who'd built this city from the ground up. My engagement to Theodore Blackthorne III wasn't just a union of two people. It was a merger of two powerful families, two business empires, two legacies. Or so I thought. As Celeste and Theodore finally broke apart, her emerald dress, the same color as my own, which I now realized was no coincidence, seemed to shimmer under the lights like a victory banner. Her perfectly styled auburn hair hadn't moved despite their passionate embrace, and her lipstick remained flawless, as if she'd planned this moment down to the last detail. Which, as I would soon discover, she absolutely had. "Delilah," Theodore said, his voice carrying that familiar note of condescension I'd somehow learned to ignore over our 2-year relationship. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Celeste and we're in love. Real love, not the kind of arranged business partnership your family expected." The crowd gasped. I heard my best friend Jasmine push through the crowd behind me, her heels clicking urgently against the marble. But I held up my hand without turning around, my eyes fixed on my sister's face. Celeste was glowing with triumph, practically vibrating with the thrill of her perceived victory. "We've been together for 4 months," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom with practiced dramatic flair. "Ever since I moved back from Portland." Theodore realized he'd been settling for the wrong sister all along. "I'm sorry, Delilah, but you're just too serious, too focused on work. Theodore needs someone who can match his energy, his passion for life." 4 months. I let that timeline sink in as I studied their faces. 4 months ago was when Celeste had suddenly quit her job at that boutique marketing firm in Portland and moved back to Seattle, claiming she'd landed a dream position at Meridian Holdings, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms. 4 months ago was when Theodore had started working late more often, when he'd begun suggesting we postpone our wedding date, when he'd started questioning whether we were truly compatible. 4 months ago was also when my private investigator had delivered the most interesting photographs to my office. "You're right," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the acoustically perfect ballroom. You two do deserve each other. In fact, this saves me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Celeste's smile wavered slightly. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd anticipated tears, begging, a public breakdown that would cement her position as the victor and me as the pathetic older sister who couldn't keep her man. The crowd murmured uncertainly, phones appearing as Seattle's social media influencers prepared to document what they assumed would be my spectacular meltdown. Please, I continued, raising my voice so everyone could hear, join me in congratulating the happy couple. Theodore and Celeste, may you have exactly the relationship you deserve. I picked up a fresh champagne flute from a passing waiter and raised it high. But before we toast, I think there's someone here who deserves to know about this beautiful love story. Someone who's been very patient, very understanding, and very married. The color drained from Celeste's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Theodore's eyes darted nervously around the room as if looking for an escape route. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from what was coming next. Richard Vancroft, I called out, my voice sweet as honey, could you join us up here? I think you'll find this announcement particularly interesting, considering how much overtime my sister has been putting in at your office lately. The crowd turned as one to watch Richard Vancroft, CEO of Meridian Holdings, push through the crowd with his wife Catherine at his side. His face had gone ashen, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. Catherine looked confused, still smiling as if this were all part of some elaborate entertainment. That's when I knew I had them exactly where I wanted them. The real show was about to begin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence in the Grand Astoria ballroom was deafening as Richard Vancroft made his way through the crowd, his wife Catherine's arm linked through his, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the chandeliers above. She was still smiling that polite society smile, completely unaware that her world was about to implode in front of 300 witnesses. Delilah, darling, Catherine said as they approached, her voice warm with genuine affection. What a lovely party. Though I must say, this announcement seems rather dramatic? She glanced between Theodore and Celeste with mild confusion, still processing what she'd witnessed. Richard's face had turned the color of ash, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the perfectly climate-controlled ballroom. His expensive Tom Ford suit suddenly looked rumpled, as if he were shrinking inside it. He kept glancing at Celeste, whose emerald dress now seemed to mock the very green of her complexion. Oh, Catherine, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. I'm so glad you're here for this. You see, Theodore and Celeste's love story is quite fascinating. It's all about workplace romance, office chemistry, and the kind of dedication that keeps employees working very, very late. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something explosive was about to happen. I could see phones being raised, Seattle's social elite preparing to document what was already becoming the scandal of the season. My best friend Jasmine had positioned herself near the string quartet, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained excitement. What are you talking about? Celeste hissed, her voice low but audible to those nearest us. The confident woman who'd been basking in her triumph moments before was rapidly being replaced by someone who looked like a cornered animal. I'm talking about your real relationship, sister dear, I said, pulling out my phone with deliberate slowness. The one that started 6 months ago, not 4. The one that involves late-night strategy sessions in corner offices and weekend business trips to the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Catherine's smile faltered. I'm sorry, what does this have to do with Richard? Everything, I replied, swiping through my phone's photo gallery. You see, Catherine, while your husband has been telling you he's been working late to secure new clients, he's actually been securing something else entirely. Someone else entirely. Richard stepped forward, his voice shaking. Delilah, I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all, I interrupted, holding up my phone so the crowd could see the screen. The photograph was crystal clear. Celeste and Richard, in a passionate embrace outside the Four Seasons, her hands tangled in his graying hair, his wedding ring glinting in the streetlight. "This was taken 3 weeks ago, Catherine. The same night Richard told you he was having dinner with potential investors from Vancouver." The gasp from the crowd was audible. Catherine's face went from confusion to horror to fury in the span of seconds. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, her diamond wedding ring catching the light as she staggered backward. "That's not—" Celeste started, but I cut her off. "Oh, but it is," I said, swiping to the next photo. "And this one was taken last Tuesday at the Meridian Holdings Christmas party. The one where spouses weren't invited because it was employees only." The image showed Richard's hand resting possessively on Celeste's lower back, as she whispered something in his ear, both of them laughing intimately, while surrounded by their unsuspecting colleagues. "Richard?" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the ballroom it carried like a scream. "Is this true?" Theodore, who had been standing frozen beside Celeste, suddenly found his voice. "Wait, what? Celeste, what is she talking about? You said you barely knew your boss." The beautiful, confident woman who had stolen my fiancé was now trapped between her two lovers, both of whom were staring at her with dawning horror. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every moment of her downfall. "I can explain," Celeste said, her voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I said, swiping through more photos. "Because it looks like you've been playing a very dangerous game, sister." "Theodore, did you know that while Celeste was sneaking around with you, she was also sneaking around with her married boss? And Richard, did you know that while you were promising my sister a future, she was already planning to leave you for my fiancé?" The room erupted in whispers. I could hear fragments of conversation. "How scandalous." "Poor Catherine. I can't believe—" "This is better than reality TV." Catherine's shock was transforming into something far more dangerous. Her voice, when she spoke, was ice-cold and deadly calm. "6 months, Richard. 6 months you've been lying to me, to our children, to everyone we know?" "Catherine, please, let me explain." "Explain?" Her laugh was bitter and sharp. "Explain how you've been having an affair with a woman young enough to be your daughter? Explain how you've been risking our family, our reputation, our 23-year marriage for this?" Celeste flinched as if she'd been slapped. "Mrs. Vancroft, I never meant—" "Never meant what?" Catherine's voice rose, her careful composure finally cracking. "Never meant to sleep with my husband? Never meant to destroy my family? Never meant to get caught?" Theodore, meanwhile, was staring at Celeste with pure disgust. "You're sleeping with him, too? While you were telling me you loved me? While you were convincing me to leave Delilah?" "Theodore, you don't understand." Celeste reached for him, but he stepped back as if her touch would burn him. "I understand perfectly," he said, his voice thick with revulsion. "You're exactly what Delilah's family always said you were. A manipulative, scheming—" "Don't you dare!" Celeste snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. "Don't you dare judge me when you were willing to humiliate your own fiancé at her engagement party. You're no better than I am." "At least I wasn't sleeping with multiple people while lying to everyone," Theodore shot back. The crowd was eating up every word, phones recording, social media posts already going live. I could see the hashtags forming. Hashtag Seattle scandal, hashtag engagement party drama, hashtag cheating exposed. Richard tried one last desperate play. "Catherine, if we could just talk privately." "Privately?" Catherine's laugh was hollow. "Like you and that little slut have been doing privately for months? No, Richard. If you wanted privacy, you shouldn't have been stupid enough to conduct your affair right under everyone's noses." "Don't call her that." Richard started, then stopped, realizing he was only making things worse. "Oh, how sweet," Catherine said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "He's defending his mistress. How very noble of you, Richard. I'm sure your daughter will be so proud when she hears about this at Harvard." I'm sure your son will love explaining to his friends why his father couldn't keep his hands off his secretary." "She's not my secretary," Richard protested weakly. "No, she's worse," Catherine replied. "She's a homewrecker who knew exactly what she was doing. And you, my dear husband, are a fool who threw away everything for a woman who was playing you from the very beginning." As the three of them dissolved into accusations and recriminations, I stood back and watched my plan unfold perfectly. The sister who had tried to steal my future, the fiancé who had betrayed my trust, and the man who had enabled it all, they were destroying each other without me having to lift another finger. But this was just the beginning. The real fireworks were yet to come. As the chaos unfolded before me, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over my body. To understand why I wasn't devastated, why I wasn't crying or screaming like everyone expected, you need to know the real story of Celeste and me. We weren't just sisters. We were two people who had been locked in an invisible war for most of our lives, and tonight was simply the final battle. My name is Delilah Rothford, and I built my reputation in Seattle's cutthroat real estate market from absolutely nothing. While other developers relied on family money or investor backing, I started with a single duplex renovation in the Queen Anne district and turned it into Rothford Properties, now one of the most respected development firms in the Pacific Northwest. Every building that bears my company's name, every million-dollar project, every award on my office wall, I earned through 16-hour days, strategic partnerships, and an uncompromising attention to detail that made me the person everyone called when they needed results. Celeste, on the other hand, was the golden child who had never worked for anything in her life. 3 years younger than me, she inherited our mother's striking beauty and our father's charm, but somehow missed the work ethic that defined the rest of our family. While I was studying business at the University of Washington and working part-time jobs to cover my expenses, Celeste was being handed everything on a silver platter: designer clothes, a car for her 16th birthday, and college tuition to Portland State, where she majored in communications with a minor in what our father jokingly called professional networking. Our parents, Harrison and Victoria Rothford, had built their fortune in shipping logistics, turning a small freight company into the dominant cargo operation on the West Coast. They loved both their daughters, but they treated us completely differently. I was the heir apparent, groomed from childhood to understand business, finance, and the brutal realities of maintaining wealth in a competitive world. Celeste was the princess, protected from anything unpleasant, given allowances instead of responsibilities, and somehow convinced that her beauty and charm would always be enough to secure her future. The dynamic became even more pronounced after our parents died in a sailing accident 4 years ago off the coast of Puget Sound. The will had been crystal clear. I inherited controlling interest in the family businesses and the majority of their assets, while Celeste received a substantial trust fund managed by the family attorneys. The logic was sound. I had the education, experience, and drive to continue building the family legacy, while Celeste needed financial security without the pressure of running complex enterprises. But Celeste had never seen it that way. In her mind, I had somehow stolen what should have been equally shared. She conveniently forgot about the MBA I'd earned while working full-time, the years I'd spent learning every aspect of the family business, the sacrifices I'd made while she was dating her way through Portland's social scene. In her version of reality, I was simply the lucky older sister who got everything because of an accident of birth order. After the funeral, she'd moved to Portland, claiming she needed space to find herself. For 3 years, she'd drifted between jobs: assistant at an art gallery, coordinator for a wedding planning company, social media manager for a boutique wine bar. Each position lasted just long enough for her to master the office politics and charm the male executives before she grew bored and moved on to something else. I supported her choices, sent birthday gifts, and tried to maintain our relationship despite the growing distance between us. Theodore Blackthorne III entered my life 2 years ago at a charity gala for Seattle Children's Hospital. He was handsome in that polished, prep school way that Seattle's old money families cultivated. Tall, broad-shouldered, with prematurely silver hair and a smile that photographers loved. As the heir to Blackthorn Maritime, one of the oldest shipping companies on the West Coast, he understood the pressures of inherited responsibility and the complexities of managing family expectations. Our courtship had been everything Seattle society expected: dinners at the Metropolitan Grill, weekends at his family's estate on Bainbridge Island, appearances at the right charity events, and gallery openings. He was intelligent, well-educated, and shared my appreciation for classical music and fine wine. When he proposed last Christmas at the family cabin in Whistler, surrounded by snow-covered mountains and twinkling lights, it felt like the natural conclusion to a relationship that made sense on every level. But looking back now, as I watched him and Celeste destroy each other in front of 300 witnesses, I realized that our entire relationship had been built on compatibility rather than passion. We worked well together, our families approved, our businesses complemented each other perfectly. We were a merger disguised as a romance, and perhaps that's exactly what attracted Celeste to him. Not love, but the opportunity to steal something that represented everything she felt she'd been denied. When Celeste had announced 6 months ago that she was moving back to Seattle, I'd been genuinely happy. She'd landed what she described as her dream job at Meridian Holdings, working directly under Richard Vancroft in their client relations department. Finally, I thought, she was ready to build something meaningful, to use her natural charm and intelligence for professional success, rather than personal manipulation. I should have known better. Celeste had never been interested in building anything. She was only interested in taking what others had built. And Richard Vancroft, despite his reputation as a shrewd businessman, had been just another mark in her long history of using powerful men to advance her agenda. Richard was 52 years old, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confidence that came from 2 decades of closing million-dollar deals. His wife Catherine had been a fixture in Seattle society since their marriage 23 years ago, serving on the boards of multiple charities and raising their 2 children, while Richard built Meridian Holdings into one of the region's most successful investment firms. They were the kind of couple that appeared in Seattle Magazine's annual Power Couples feature: attractive, wealthy, and seemingly unshakable. But every successful man has vulnerabilities, and Celeste had always been expert at identifying and exploiting them. Richard's children were both away at college, leaving him and Catherine in that empty nest phase that destroys so many long-term marriages. His business required frequent travel and long hours, creating distance between him and his wife. And like many men his age, he was probably questioning whether his best years were behind him, whether he was still attractive, still vital, still capable of inspiring passion in beautiful young women. Celeste had studied him like a predator studies prey, learning his routines, his preferences, his weaknesses. She'd probably started slowly, staying late to help with projects, asking thoughtful questions about his business philosophy, laughing at his jokes just a little too enthusiastically. She would have made him feel important, appreciated, understood in ways his busy wife couldn't manage. And when she finally made her move, he probably felt like the luckiest man alive, rather than the mark he actually was. The truly diabolical part of Celeste's plan was using Richard's resources and connections to get closer to Theodore. Meridian Holdings had been courting Blackthorn Maritime for potential partnership opportunities, which meant Richard regularly attended the same social events as Theodore and me. Celeste would have had inside information about Theodore's schedule, his business concerns, his relationship with me. She could position herself perfectly to seem like a coincidental presence in his life while actually orchestrating every encounter. And Theodore, despite his intelligence and business acumen, had been just as vulnerable as Richard. Our relationship, while stable and comfortable, lacked the excitement that someone like Celeste could provide. Where I talked about market projections and development timelines, she talked about adventure and spontaneity. Where I wore conservative business attire, she wore clothes designed to make men forget their responsibilities. Where I represented duty and expectation, she represented escape and forbidden pleasure. The fact that she was my sister probably made the betrayal even more intoxicating for him. There's something uniquely appealing about forbidden fruit, and stealing his fiancé's sister would have made Theodore feel powerful in a way that our legitimate relationship never could. He probably convinced himself that what he felt for Celeste was deeper, more real, more meaningful than what we'd built together. But both men had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. They saw a beautiful young woman who made them feel special, who seemed to want them for themselves rather than their money or status. They didn't see the calculating predator who had been planning their destruction from the moment she decided what she wanted to take from me. As I stood in that ballroom, watching the three of them tear each other apart, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. They had no idea what was coming next. The signs had been there for months, subtle at first, but growing more obvious as Celeste settled back into Seattle life. I just hadn't wanted to see them, hadn't wanted to believe that my own sister could be capable of such calculated betrayal. But as I watched the chaos unfold in the ballroom, every warning signal I'd ignored came rushing back with crystal clarity. It started in March, just 2 weeks after Celeste moved back from Portland. She'd called me breathlessly excited about her new position at Meridian Holdings, gushing about how Richard Vancroft himself had personally interviewed her and been impressed by her fresh perspective and innovative ideas for client relations. At the time, I'd been genuinely proud. Finally, my sister seemed to be taking her career seriously, landing a prestigious position at one of Seattle's most respected firms. "He's so brilliant, Delilah," she'd said during our lunch at the Pink Door overlooking Elliott Bay. "Mr. Vancroft really understands the importance of personal connections in business. He says I have a natural gift for making clients feel comfortable and valued." I should have paid more attention to the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her boss, the way she lingered over his name like it was something precious. Instead, I'd been distracted by wedding planning and a complex development project in Belltown that was consuming most of my attention. The first real warning sign came in April, during Theodore's birthday dinner at Canlis. Celeste had insisted on joining us, claiming she wanted to celebrate her future brother-in-law properly. She'd arrived wearing a stunning red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings I'd given her for Christmas. "Theodore, you look so distinguished tonight," she'd purred, settling into the seat across from him with fluid grace. "Delilah is so lucky to have someone who appreciates the finer things in life." Throughout dinner, she'd peppered him with questions about his business, his travels, his interests, hanging on every word with the kind of rapt attention that makes men feel like the most fascinating creatures on earth. When he mentioned his passion for sailing, she'd gasped with apparent delight. "I've always wanted to learn to sail. There's something so romantic about being out on the water, feeling the wind in your hair, trusting yourself to the elements." She'd leaned forward, her hand briefly touching his arm. "Maybe you could teach me sometime?" Theodore had practically glowed under her attention, his chest puffing out with masculine pride. "I'd be happy to take you out on the Sound sometime. The Blackthorn family has been sailing these waters for generations." I'd felt a flicker of unease then, watching the way they looked at each other, but I'd pushed it down. Celeste was naturally flirtatious. It was just her personality. And Theodore was simply being polite to his future sister-in-law. There was nothing sinister about a sailing lesson. Except there was. Because 3 weeks later, when I'd suggested we take Theodore's yacht out for a romantic sunset cruise, he'd claimed he was too busy with work. When I'd proposed a weekend sailing trip to the San Juan Islands, he'd suddenly developed a mysterious aversion to being on the water. The pattern continued through May and June. Celeste would find excuses to join us for dinner, always dressed impeccably, always armed with thoughtful questions about Theodore's work and interests. She'd started following him on Instagram, liking every photo within minutes of posting. She'd begun showing up at the same coffee shop where he grabbed his morning espresso. Claiming it was on her way to work, even though Meridian Holdings was in the opposite direction. Meanwhile, Theodore had become increasingly distant with me. Our conversations, once filled with shared jokes and comfortable intimacy, became stilted and formal. He'd started working late more frequently, claiming pressure from his father to secure new shipping contracts. When I'd suggest dinner or weekend plans, he'd often beg off, citing exhaustion or business obligations. The most telling sign came in July, during what should have been a routine discussion about our wedding venue. We'd been touring the Fairmont Olympic Hotel's ballroom, and I'd been excitedly pointing out the architectural details and discussing floral arrangements when Theodore's phone buzzed with a text message. His entire demeanor changed instantly. His face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks, and he quickly typed a response with the kind of eager enthusiasm he used to reserve for me. "Work emergency?" I'd asked casually. "Oh, just Celeste," he'd replied, then caught himself. "I mean, she texted about some business question. She's been asking my advice about client relations at Meridian." The lie was smooth, practiced, but I'd seen the contact name on his phone screen, Beautiful C with a heart emoji. That's not how you save your fiancé's sister's number, unless something inappropriate is happening. That night, I'd called my sister under the pretense of casual conversation. "How are things going at work? Theodore mentioned you've been asking his advice about client relations." There had been just the slightest pause before she'd answered. "Oh yes, he's been so helpful. Such a smart man, your Theodore. You're lucky to have someone so attentive." The way she'd said attentive made my skin crawl. There was something predatory in her tone, something possessive that had no business being there. By August, I'd started paying closer attention to their interactions, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Celeste had developed an uncanny ability to show up wherever Theodore and I were dining, shopping, or attending events. She'd wave cheerfully from across restaurants, claiming coincidence, then somehow end up joining our table. She'd bump into us at gallery openings, charity functions, even the farmers market in Pike Place. "What are the odds?" she'd laugh, linking her arm through mine while her eyes stayed fixed on Theodore. "It's like the universe keeps bringing us together." The universe had nothing to do with it. Someone had been tracking our movements, probably through social media, or by pumping mutual friends for information about our plans. The final confirmation came in September, during a dinner party at the Vancrofts' waterfront mansion in Magnolia. Catherine had invited several couples from their social circle, including Theodore and me. The evening had been pleasant enough: excellent wine, stimulating conversation, spectacular views of Puget Sound, until I'd excused myself to use the restroom. The powder room was located down a hallway that passed by Richard's home office, and as I'd walked by, I'd heard voices coming from behind the partially closed door. One was unmistakably Richard's deep baritone, but the other voice had made me freeze in my tracks. "Can't keep doing this," Richard was saying, his voice strained with emotion. "Catherine suspects something. Last night she asked why I've been working so many late nights." "Shh," came Celeste's voice, sultry and reassuring. "Don't worry about Catherine. She's too focused on her charity committees to pay real attention. Besides, we're being careful." "But what about your sister? What about Theodore, if they find out?" "They won't find out," Celeste had said with absolute confidence. "Delilah is too buried in her projects to notice anything. And Theodore is going to be very busy soon." There had been a rustling sound, like fabric moving, and then Richard's voice had become muffled, as if he were being kissed. I'd stood frozen in that hallway, my hand pressed against the wall for support, as the full scope of my sister's betrayal became clear. She wasn't just having an affair with her married boss. She was planning something involving Theodore, something that would keep him very busy. I'd returned to the dinner party with a smile plastered on my face, making polite conversation while my mind raced with implications. Over dessert, I'd watched Celeste chat animatedly with Catherine about upcoming charity events, her performance so convincing that even I might have believed her innocence if I hadn't overheard that conversation. But it was Theodore's behavior that night that had truly opened my eyes. Every time Celeste spoke, his attention would shift to her like a magnet finding true north. When she laughed, he'd smile automatically. When she complimented the wine selection, he'd nod approvingly as if her opinion mattered more than anyone else's at the table. They were already emotionally involved, even if the physical affair hadn't started yet. Celeste was playing a long game, systematically destroying my relationships with both men, while positioning herself as the prize they were competing for. That night, I'd made a decision that would change everything. If my sister wanted to play games, I'd make sure she understood exactly what she was playing with. Because while Celeste had always been beautiful and charming, she'd never been particularly intelligent about covering her tracks. And I'd been building my reputation on being very, very good at uncovering the truth. As the accusations flew between Celeste, Theodore, and Richard in the center of the ballroom, I stepped back and did something that shocked everyone present. I began to applaud. Not the slow, sarcastic clap of mockery, but genuine, enthusiastic applause that echoed through the suddenly quiet space. "Bravo," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the marble floors. "Truly spectacular performances, all of you. I couldn't have orchestrated this revelation better myself." The three of them stopped their arguing and stared at me with expressions ranging from confusion to horror. The crowd of Seattle's elite pressed closer, their phones still recording, sensing that the evening's entertainment was far from over. "Delilah, what are you doing?" Celeste hissed, her carefully constructed mask of victimhood slipping completely. "This isn't a joke." "You're absolutely right," I replied, smoothing down my emerald silk gown with practiced composure. "This isn't a joke at all. This is a masterclass in consequences. And you three are providing the curriculum." Catherine Vancroft, who had been standing rigid with shock and fury, turned to look at me with newfound interest. "You knew about this?" "Mrs. Vancroft," I said, offering her a gentle smile, "I've known about your husband's affair with my sister for 3 months. Just as I've known about Celeste's simultaneous seduction of my fiancé for nearly as long." The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Even the waitstaff had stopped pretending to work and were listening with rapt attention. "That's impossible," Richard stammered, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead. "There's no way you could have known. We were careful. We never." "Mr. Vancroft," I interrupted smoothly, "you may be brilliant at investment strategies, but you're remarkably naive about operational security. Did you really think no one would notice when you started booking the same hotel suite twice a week for, quote, client meetings that never appeared on Meridian Holdings' official calendar?" Theodore stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "If you knew, why didn't you say anything? Why let this go on?" I tilted my head, studying him with the same detached interest I might show a particularly fascinating business case study. "Because, Theodore, I needed to see exactly how far you were both willing to go. I needed to understand whether you were merely weak and easily manipulated, or actively malicious and calculating." "And what's your verdict?" Celeste asked, her voice dripping with false bravado. "Oh, my dear sister," I said, my smile widening, "you're definitely in the latter category. But these two gentlemen? They're just pathetic." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Nothing Seattle society loved more than a public takedown delivered with style and precision. "You see," I continued, addressing the room as much as the 3 people I was destroying, "what you've all witnessed tonight isn't just a simple case of infidelity. It's a carefully orchestrated demonstration of character, played out on the most public stage possible." I gestured gracefully toward the chandeliers and flower arrangements that had cost more than most people's annual salary. "When I planned this engagement party 3 months ago, I had a very different evening in mind. But sometimes life presents you with opportunities that are simply too perfect to waste." "What are you talking about?" Theodore demanded. "I'm talking about giving people enough rope to hang themselves with," I replied. 3 months ago, when I discovered that my sister was sleeping with her married boss while simultaneously planning to steal my fiancé, I had several options. I could have confronted you all privately, demanded explanations, tried to salvage relationships that were already poisoned beyond repair. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the crowd. Or, I continued, I could wait. I could document everything. I could let you all believe you were so clever, so subtle, so successful in your deceptions. I could plan the perfect venue for revealing the truth, a venue where your shame would be witnessed by everyone who matters in this city. Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. You planned this entire evening as a trap? Not originally, I admitted. Originally, this was going to be a celebration of love and commitment. But when I realized what my sister and fiancé were planning, when I understood that they intended to use this very party as the stage for their grand romantic gesture, I decided to help them achieve their dreams. Help us? Celeste sputtered. Of course, I said brightly. You wanted to publicly claim Theodore as your prize, to humiliate me in front of everyone we know, to establish yourself as the victor in whatever sick competition you've been playing in your head. Well, congratulations! You've achieved exactly that. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. And Richard, I continued, turning to the devastated investment manager, you wanted to feel young and vital again, to prove that you could still attract a beautiful woman, to recapture some fantasy of passion that you felt was missing from your marriage. You've certainly demonstrated those desires to everyone present. And Theodore, I said, my voice softening slightly, you wanted excitement, adventure, the thrill of forbidden romance. You wanted to feel like the kind of man who could steal another man's woman and seduce his fiancée's sister. Well, darling, you've proven yourself to be exactly that kind of man. The three of them stood frozen, beginning to understand that they hadn't won anything at all. But here's what you all failed to consider, I said, my voice growing stronger, more confident. I didn't just know about your affairs, I documented them. Every hotel reservation, every text message, every supposedly secret meeting, every lie you told, every alibi you constructed, every betrayal you thought was hidden. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through what was clearly an extensive collection of evidence. More importantly, I researched the consequences. Richard, do you remember the morality clause in your employment contract at Meridian Holdings? The one that specifically mentions conduct unbecoming of an executive. The one that voids your severance package and stock options if you're terminated for ethical violations? Richard's face went from red to gray in seconds. And Theodore, did you forget about the partnership agreement between Blackthorn Maritime and my development company? The one that includes provisions for immediate contract cancellation in cases of personal betrayal or breach of trust. Theodore's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. As for you, Celeste, I said, turning to my sister with something that might have been pity in my eyes, you've always been so focused on taking things from other people that you never bothered to build anything of your own, which makes this next part particularly satisfying. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the climax of the evening's drama. You see, everyone, I announced to the room, while my sister was busy destroying my relationships, I was busy building something much more valuable. I was building evidence, I was building legal cases, I was building the foundation for consequences that will last much longer than this party. And most importantly, I continued, my smile becoming genuinely warm for the first time all evening, I was building the strength to stand here tonight and thank them all for showing me exactly who they really are. The applause started slowly from the back of the room, but it grew steadily until the entire ballroom was clapping. Not for the drama, not for the scandal, but for the dignity and grace with which I was handling my own public humiliation. Now, I said, raising my champagne glass one final time, let's toast to truth, to consequences, and to the wonderful clarity that comes from watching people reveal their true natures. The real show was just beginning. The champagne toast hung in the air for exactly 3 heartbeats before I set down my glass and reached into my purse. What I pulled out wasn't another phone full of incriminating photos. It was a thick manila envelope that I'd been carrying with me all evening, waiting for exactly this moment. "Since we're all being so honest tonight," I said, my voice carrying that same unnaturally calm tone that had been unsettling everyone since this began, "I think it's time to share some additional information that might interest our audience." I opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, the sound of tearing paper somehow audible even over the crowd's collective held breath. Inside were several sets of documents, each paper clipped into neat stacks that I'd organized with the same meticulous attention to detail that had built my business empire. "Richard," I said, pulling out the first stack, "I believe this belongs to you." I held up what was clearly an official letterhead from Meridian Holdings' board of directors. Even from a distance, the crowd could see the formal formatting, the corporate seal, the signatures at the bottom. "What is that?" Richard asked, though his voice suggested he already knew and was terrified of the answer. "This is a formal complaint filed with Meridian Holdings' board of directors, documenting your violation of company policy regarding relationships with subordinates, misuse of company resources for personal affairs, and breach of your fiduciary duty to shareholders," I said, reading from the document with the clinical precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. The color drained from Richard's face so quickly I thought he might collapse. "You can't, that's not, how did I get access to Meridian Holdings' internal policies and complaint procedures?" I finished for him. "Richard, darling, did you forget that my development company has been working with Meridian Holdings on 3 major projects over the past 2 years? Did you think I wouldn't have contacts on your board? People who owe me favors? People who care more about protecting the company's reputation than protecting a middle-aged executive who can't keep his hands off his employees?" I turned to address the crowd, many of whom included business leaders who would understand exactly what this meant. For those unfamiliar with corporate governance, a formal complaint of this nature triggers an immediate internal investigation. Given the, shall we say, photographic evidence I've provided, that investigation is likely to be quite brief. "Photographic evidence?" Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Oh yes," I said brightly, pulling out a second set of documents. "Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, credit card statements showing payments for jewelry that mysteriously appeared on my sister's Instagram account, parking garage security footage from the Four Seasons, and my personal favorite, key card logs showing Richard's company credit card being used to book the same hotel suite 14 times over the past 3 months. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every detail of Richard's humiliation. I could already imagine the headlines that would appear in Seattle's business journals by morning. "But that's not the most interesting part," I continued, savoring the moment like fine wine. "The most interesting part is that Meridian Holdings has a very strict policy about executives who bring scandal and negative publicity to the firm. Something about protecting shareholder value and maintaining the company's reputation in the community." I smiled at Richard with mock sympathy. "I'm afraid the penalty for that kind of behavior is immediate termination, without severance, without stock options, without any of the golden parachute benefits you've been counting on for your retirement." "You vindictive bitch," Richard snarled, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "You planned this whole thing just to destroy me!" The gasp from the crowd was audible. Catherine stepped back from her husband as if he'd physically struck her. "Actually," I said, my voice remaining infuriatingly calm, "I planned this to reveal the truth. Your destruction is simply a natural consequence of your choices. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're not finished yet." I turned to Theodore, pulling out the third stack of documents. "Theodore, sweetheart, I have something for you too." If possible, Theodore looked even more terrified than Richard. "Delilah, whatever you think you're doing." "I'm doing exactly what I said I would do," I interrupted. "I'm revealing the truth. And the truth is that you've been in breach of contract with Rothford Properties for the past 4 months. I held up what was clearly a legal document, complete with law firm letterhead and official stamps. "This is a formal notice of contract cancellation for the Belltown Harbor Development Project. You know, the one worth $47 million that was going to revitalize the waterfront district? Theodore's eyes widened with horror. You can't cancel that contract. My father's counting on that project. It's the cornerstone of Blackthorn Maritime's expansion into luxury residential development. I can, and I have, I said simply. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our partnership agreement clearly states that either party may terminate the contract immediately upon discovery of fraud, misrepresentation, or personal conduct that compromises the business relationship. I gestured toward Celeste, who was standing frozen like a deer in headlights. I'd say sleeping with your business partner's sister while planning to humiliate her at your engagement party qualifies as compromising conduct, wouldn't you? The crowd murmured agreement. In Seattle's business community, personal relationships and professional partnerships were often inseparable, and everyone understood that betraying one meant destroying the other. But wait, I continued with mock cheerfulness. There's more. You see, Theodore, when you signed that partnership agreement, you also signed a personal guarantee backed by Blackthorn Maritime's assets, which means your family company is now legally responsible for the $2 million in development costs that Rothford Properties has already invested in the project. Theodore swayed on his feet. $2 million? But we don't have— the company's cash flow is already stretched because of the new shipping contracts. I know, I said with false sympathy. I've been monitoring Blackthorn Maritime's financial filings very carefully. Amazing what you can learn when you have the right connections in the banking industry. I turned back to the crowd, playing to my audience like a seasoned performer. For those keeping track at home, we've now established that Richard is about to lose his job, his pension, and his reputation, while Theodore's family business is facing a financial crisis that could bankrupt them within 6 months. But surely, I continued, my smile growing wider, the woman who caused all this chaos has a plan to help the men she claims to love? All eyes turned to Celeste, who looked like she was about to be sick. The confident, seductive woman who had kissed my fiancé an hour ago had been replaced by someone who was beginning to understand the true scope of the trap she'd walked into. Actually, I said, pulling out the final set of documents, that brings us to the most interesting revelation of the evening. I held up what appeared to be employment records and financial statements. You see, everyone, while Celeste was busy seducing these two gentlemen, she neglected to mention some rather important details about her own situation. The crowd leaned in, sensing that the biggest bombshell was yet to come. Tell me, sister dear, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting. What exactly were you planning to inform Richard and Theodore about your rather significant gambling debts? Celeste's face went white as chalk. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the $73,000 you owe to various casinos in Las Vegas, Reno, and Vancouver, I said matter-of-factly. I'm talking about the loan sharks who've been calling your apartment looking for payment. I'm talking about the real reason you moved back to Seattle, not to find yourself or pursue new career opportunities, but because you'd burned through every bridge and maxed out every credit line on the West Coast. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, transfixed by the revelation. You see, gentlemen, I continued, addressing Richard and Theodore directly, you weren't seduced by a free-spirited young woman looking for love. You were Mark in a very calculated con game, played by someone desperate enough to try anything to solve her financial problems. I looked directly at Celeste, whose carefully constructed facade had finally crumbled completely. The question now is, which one of them were you planning to fleece first? The question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, thick and suffocating. Celeste's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. For the first time in her life, my sister, the woman who had always been able to charm her way out of any situation, was completely speechless. I don't know what you're talking about, she finally managed, but her voice was barely a whisper. Really? I asked, pulling out my phone one final time. Because I have a very interesting voicemail here from Marcus Chen at Pacific Coast Recovery Services. Would you like me to play it for everyone? The blood drained from Celeste's face so quickly I was genuinely concerned she might collapse. Delilah, please. But I was already pressing play. Marcus Chen's gravelly voice filled the ballroom through my phone's speaker, crystal clear thanks to the room's excellent acoustics. Ms. Rothford, this is Marcus Chen calling again about your outstanding balance of $73,467. Your payment was due 3 weeks ago, and we're running out of patience. If we don't hear from you by Friday, we'll have no choice but to pursue alternative collection methods. You know what that means. The collective gasp from the crowd was so loud it nearly drowned out the rest of the message. We understand you have family in Seattle with significant assets. Perhaps they might be interested in helping you resolve this matter before it becomes unpleasant. Call me back, Ms. Rothford. Today. I ended the recording and slipped my phone back into my purse with the casual air of someone who had just shared a favorite recipe rather than exposed a criminal conspiracy. Alternative collection methods, I repeated thoughtfully. Such an interesting euphemism, don't you think? I wonder what Marcus Chen considers unpleasant. Theodore and Richard were staring at Celeste with expressions of pure horror. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't just been cheated on. They'd been marked as potential victims in what was essentially an extortion scheme. You were going to use us, Richard whispered, his voice thick with disgust. You were going to manipulate us into paying your debts. Both of us, Theodore added, his hands clenching into fists. You were playing us against each other, seeing which one would be easier to bleed dry. Celeste's carefully constructed mask of victimhood crumbled completely. It wasn't like that. I do have feelings for both of you. Stop, I said firmly, cutting her off before she could dig herself any deeper. Just stop. You've embarrassed yourself enough for one evening. I turned to address the crowd, many of whom were still recording everything on their phones. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all learned quite enough about human nature for one evening. The open bar will remain available for another hour, and I encourage you all to stay and enjoy yourselves. Consider this an early lesson in the importance of thorough background checks in both business and personal relationships. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Despite the drama, or perhaps because of it, Seattle's elite were thoroughly entertained. This would be the story that defined the social season, the scandal that would be referenced at dinner parties for years to come. However, I continued, my voice taking on a more serious tone, I do need to address one final matter before I take my leave. I walked over to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing, accepting the microphone from the lead violinist with a gracious nod. My voice, when amplified, carried easily to every corner of the ballroom. My dear friends and colleagues, I began, I want to thank you all for being here tonight to witness what was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment. While the evening hasn't unfolded quite as originally planned, I believe it's been far more educational. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I also want to assure you that Rothford Properties will continue to operate with the same integrity and professionalism that has defined our work for the past decade. Tonight's revelations will have no impact on our current projects or future commitments. In fact, I'm pleased to announce that the Belltown Harbor development will proceed as scheduled, with new partners who share our values and vision. More enthusiastic applause this time. The business community was already calculating the opportunities that would arise from Theodore's downfall and my newfound availability as a development partner. To those of you who have worked with me professionally, I hope tonight has demonstrated that Rothford Properties values honesty, transparency, and accountability above all else. We don't just build beautiful buildings, we build trust. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the faces in the crowd, many of whom were nodding approvingly. And to those of you who might be wondering about my personal situation, let me be clear. Tonight has been a gift. A painful, humiliating, but ultimately liberating gift that has shown me exactly who deserves my trust and who doesn't. My best friend Jasmine had positioned herself near the exit, holding my coat and purse, her expression a mixture of pride and barely contained fury on my behalf. She caught my eye and nodded slightly, our prearranged signal that everything was ready for my departure. I'm often asked what separates successful businesses from failures, I continued into the microphone. Tonight, I think you've seen the answer. Successful enterprises are built on solid foundations, thorough research, careful planning, and the wisdom to cut losses before they become catastrophic. I looked directly at Theodore, Richard, and Celeste, who were still standing frozen in the center of the ballroom like actors who had forgotten their lines. Failed enterprises, on the other hand, are built on deception, shortcuts, and the arrogant assumption that other people are too stupid to see through obvious lies. The crowd was hanging on every word now. This wasn't just a personal statement. It was a masterclass in crisis management delivered by someone who had just turned her own public humiliation into a demonstration of strength and strategic thinking. So let tonight serve as a lesson to us all, I said, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired. Reputation, once lost, takes decades to rebuild. And consequences, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. I handed the microphone back to the violinist and stepped down from the stage, walking with perfect posture and unhurried grace toward the exit. The crowd parted before me like water, creating a clear path to the door. As I passed Catherine Vancroft, I paused briefly. "Mrs. Vancroft," I said quietly, "my lawyer will be in touch tomorrow morning with some additional documentation you might find useful for your divorce proceedings. Pro bono, of course." Catherine's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded and continued toward the exit, where Jasmine was waiting with my belongings. But I wasn't quite finished yet. "Oh, and one more thing," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom without amplification. "Celeste, darling, you might want to call Marcus Chen back tonight. I have a feeling his patience is about to run out completely." I slipped on my coat, accepted my purse from Jasmine, and walked out of the Grand Astoria ballroom with my head held high, leaving behind the wreckage of 3 lives and the foundation for my own rebirth. The real work was just beginning. The next 72 hours unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch and the devastating efficiency of a controlled demolition. I had spent months preparing for this moment, and now that the truth was public, every piece of my carefully constructed plan clicked into place with mathematical accuracy. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that seemed to mirror the mood of at least 3 people in the city. I was in my office by 6 a.m., reviewing the final details of what my assistant had dubbed Operation Scorched Earth, though I preferred to think of it as Operation Natural Consequences. The first domino fell at exactly 9:15 a.m. when my phone rang with a call from Jonathan Pierce, chairman of Meridian Holdings' board of directors. "Delilah," his gravelly voice came through the speaker, "I've reviewed the documentation you provided regarding Richard Vancroft. The board met in emergency session this morning." "And?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from his tone. "Effective immediately, Mr. Vancroft is no longer employed by Meridian Holdings. Security escorted him from the building an hour ago. His company credit cards have been canceled, his access to all accounts revoked, and his stock options forfeited per the morality clause in his employment agreement." I made a note in my planner, crossing off the first item on a very long list. I assume the investigation confirmed the misuse of company resources. 14 hotel bookings charged to his corporate account, 3 restaurant bills for intimate dinners that were claimed as client entertainment but had no corresponding client meetings, and the jewelry purchases that somehow found their way to your sister's social media accounts. Jonathan's disgust was palpable even over the phone. "Frankly, Delilah, we're grateful you brought this to our attention before it became a public relations nightmare." "Oh, but it already has," I said pleasantly. "Haven't you seen the Seattle Times this morning?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of rustling newspaper. Jesus Christ. Investment executives' affair exposed at sister's engagement party. They have photos, Delilah. Professional quality photographs of the entire confrontation. Yes, I said simply. I may have had a friend from the Times Society page in attendance last night. Patricia Chen does such lovely work, don't you think? Jonathan groaned. This is going to be a disaster for our reputation. Actually, I corrected gently, this is going to be excellent for your reputation. Meridian Holdings acted swiftly and decisively to remove a corrupt executive the moment evidence was presented. You prioritized integrity over protecting a senior employee. The narrative practically writes itself. The relief in his voice was audible. You're right. We're already drafting a press release, emphasizing our commitment to ethical conduct and corporate responsibility. Excellent. And Jonathan, when you're ready to discuss filling Richard's position, I have some thoughts on candidates who might bring a fresh perspective to client relations. After hanging up, I checked my watch. Right on schedule. The second call came at 10:30 a.m., this time from Harrison Blackthorne Sr., Theodore's father, and the patriarch of Blackthorne Maritime. Miss Rothford, he said, without preamble, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that comes from learning your son has just destroyed a multi-million-dollar business relationship. I believe we need to discuss this contract cancellation. Mr. Blackthorne, I replied with professional courtesy, I'm happy to discuss the terms of dissolution. My legal team has prepared several options for resolving the financial obligations. Financial obligations? His voice rose slightly. Young lady, that contract was the cornerstone of our expansion strategy. Without that development project, Blackthorne Maritime faces significant cash flow problems. I understand, I said sympathetically. Unfortunately, your son's conduct made continuation of our partnership impossible. However, I'm not unreasonable. I'm prepared to offer a payment plan for the $2 million in development costs, provided certain conditions are met. There was a long pause. What conditions? First, a formal letter of apology from Theodore, acknowledging his breach of contract and unprofessional conduct. Second, immediate cessation of all contact with my sister. And third, Theodore's removal from any decision-making position within Blackthorne Maritime for a period of no less than 2 years. You want me to exile my own son? Mr. Blackthorne, I want you to demonstrate that Blackthorne Maritime is a company that values integrity and accountability. Theodore made choices that jeopardized both his personal relationships and his business obligations. Those choices have consequences. Another long pause. And if we agree to these terms, then the debt can be structured as a 5-year loan at 3% interest, well below market rates. Blackthorne Maritime continues operating. Theodore learns valuable lessons about personal responsibility, and everyone moves forward with their reputations mostly intact. And if we don't agree? My voice hardened slightly. Then I pursue immediate collection of the full amount through legal channels, which would likely force Blackthorne Maritime into bankruptcy within 6 months. Your choice, Mr. Blackthorne. The call ended with his promise to have an answer by close of business. I had no doubt what that answer would be. The third call came at 2:45 p.m., right as I was finishing a very satisfying lunch meeting with the development team from Harrison & Associates, Theodore's former competitors, who were now eager to partner with me on the Belltown Harbor project. Ms. Rothford? The voice was young, female, and terrified. This is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Holdings. I'm calling about Celeste Rothford. What about her? She didn't come to work today, or yesterday. Her direct reports are asking questions, and we have client meetings scheduled that she's supposed to be handling. I leaned back in my chair, considering my response. Have you tried calling her personal number? Yes, ma'am. It goes straight to voicemail. Her emergency contact information lists you as her next of kin. Of course it did. Even in her schemes and manipulations, Celeste had never bothered to cultivate genuine relationships that might actually help her in a crisis. I'm afraid I don't have any information about my sister's whereabouts, I said truthfully. However, given recent events, it's possible she's chosen to take some time away from Seattle. Recent events? I assume you've seen this morning's newspaper? There was a pause, followed by what sounded like frantic typing. Oh my God, that's your sister in these photos? With Mr. Vancroft? I'm afraid so. You might want to inform HR that Celeste may not be returning to her position. They'll need to make arrangements for her client accounts. After hanging up, I allowed myself a small smile. Celeste had always been excellent at starting things, relationships, jobs, schemes, but she'd never been particularly good at seeing them through when things became difficult. The fourth call came at 4:15 p.m., and this one I'd been expecting since Saturday night. Delilah? The voice was small, desperate, and barely recognizable as my sister. Please, I need to talk to you. Hello, Celeste. I've been wondering when you'd call. I'm in trouble, real trouble. Marcus Chen's people came to my apartment this morning. They weren't nice about it. I imagine not. $73,000 is a significant sum to people in his line of work. You have to help me, her voice cracked with desperation. I don't have anywhere else to turn. Theodore won't answer my calls. Richard's wife had the locks changed on their house, and I can't even access my bank account because the loan sharks froze everything. How exactly do you expect me to help you, Celeste? Loan me the money, just until I can figure something out. You know I'm good for it. I laughed, a sound completely devoid of warmth. You're good for it? Celeste, you've never paid back a loan in your life. You've never held a job for more than 18 months. You've never built anything, saved anything, or created anything of value. What exactly makes you think you're good for $73,000? Because I'm your sister, she wailed. Because family is supposed to help each other. Family? I repeated slowly. Like when you seduced my fiancé? Like when you planned to humiliate me at my own engagement party? Like when you lied to me for months while destroying my relationships? That kind of family loyalty? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Delilah, please. These people are dangerous. If I don't pay them back, they're going to hurt me. Then I suggest you find a way to pay them back. How? I lost my job, I can't access my money, and nobody will talk to me. Perhaps, I said quietly, you should have considered those consequences before you decided to gamble away $73,000. Perhaps you should have thought about the risks before you decided to use my fiancé and your boss as potential sources of emergency funding. I made mistakes, she sobbed. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your sister. No, I said firmly. You stopped being my sister the moment you decided that my happiness was less important than your schemes. You stopped being my sister when you chose to betray the one person who had always protected you, always supported you, always believed in you, despite overwhelming evidence that you were incapable of change. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. You wanted to play adult games, Celeste. Now you get to deal with adult consequences. The line went dead, and I sat in my office, surrounded by the documents and photographs that had brought down 3 people in less than 72 hours, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter peace. The systematic dismantling was complete. Now came the rebuilding. The desperation began in earnest on Thursday morning, when Theodore appeared outside my building at Rothford Properties, standing in the Seattle drizzle like some tragic romantic hero from a bad movie. I watched him from my 20th floor office window as he paced back and forth on the sidewalk, clearly working up the courage to come inside. He'd been there for over an hour when my assistant, Monica, buzzed my intercom. Ms. Rothford, there's a Mr. Blackthorne in the lobby. He says he needs to speak with you urgently about, quote, fixing this terrible misunderstanding. Monica's tone suggested exactly what she thought of his chances. Tell security to escort him out, I said, without looking up from the contracts I was reviewing for the new Belltown Harbor partnership. If he returns, they should call the police. Already handled, ma'am, but he did leave this. Monica entered with a massive bouquet of white orchids, the same flowers he'd given me on our first date 2 years ago. Attached was a card written in his familiar handwriting. Delilah, I made a terrible mistake. Please let me explain. What we had was real. Nash tea. I handed the bouquet back to Monica. Donate these to the hospital. And have legal send Mr. Blackthorne a formal cease and desist letter. I don't want him on my property again. But Theodore wasn't easily deterred. By Friday, he'd escalated to what could only be described as a full-scale campaign of romantic terrorism. He sent 24 red roses to my office. Then a delivery of my favorite pastries from Macrina Bakery. Then a violinist who serenaded the lobby with our song until security removed him. The final straw came on Saturday morning when I arrived at my favorite yoga studio in Capitol Hill to find Theodore sitting in the parking lot in his BMW, obviously waiting for me. I sat in my car for a full minute, debating whether to call the police or handle this myself. I chose option 3. Walking directly to his car, I tapped on the window with my car keys. He rolled it down immediately, his face lighting up with pathetic hope. "Delilah! Thank God you're here. I've been trying to reach you for days." "Theodore," I interrupted calmly, "you have exactly 30 seconds to explain why you're stalking me before I call 911. "Stalking? I'm not stalking you. I'm trying to apologize to make this right. What happened at the party? It was a moment of madness. Celeste manipulated me, made me think things about our relationship that weren't true." I leaned against his car, checking my watch with exaggerated patience. 20 seconds. "I love you," he said desperately. "I've always loved you. Yes, I was confused. Yes, I made a mistake, but that doesn't change what we have together. We're perfect for each other, Delilah. Our families, our businesses, our whole future is planned." 10 seconds. "Marry me," he blurted out, reaching into his jacket to pull out a ring box. "Right now, today. We can fly to Vegas, or get married at the courthouse, whatever you want. I'll do anything to prove that you're the only woman I want." I looked at the ring box, a different ring than the one he'd given me at Christmas, probably something he'd panic purchased in the last few days, and felt absolutely nothing. "Time's up," I said, pulling out my phone. "Wait, please, just listen." 911. "What's your emergency?" "Delilah, don't." "Yes, I'm being harassed by an ex-fiancé who's been following me around the city for 3 days. I'm at the Breathe Yoga Studio on Pine Street, and I feel unsafe." Theodore's face went white. "You can't be serious." I gave the dispatcher my name and location while maintaining eye contact with him. "Yes, I'll stay on the line until officers arrive." He started his car and drove away so fast his tires squealed against the pavement. The police never needed to come, but word of the incident spread through Seattle's social circles within hours. By Sunday, everyone knew that Theodore Blackthorne was so desperate to win back his ex-fiancée that he'd resorted to stalking her around the city. It was the final nail in the coffin of his already destroyed reputation. Richard's desperation took a different form entirely. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the engagement party disaster, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. "Mrs. Vancroft is here to see you," Monica announced. "She says it's about her husband." Catherine entered my office looking like she'd aged 5 years in 7 days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore minimal makeup, and her clothes, while still expensive, looked like she'd grabbed them without much thought. "Catherine," I said, standing to greet her, "how are you holding up?" "Richard wants to make a deal," she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from my desk. "He's been calling my lawyer nonstop since Friday, begging for a meeting." I poured her a cup of coffee from the carafe Monica always kept ready. "What kind of deal?" "He wants to give me everything in exchange for my silence about the affair. The house, the investments, his retirement accounts, even his share of their vacation property in Tuscany. Everything except what he needs to start over somewhere else." I raised an eyebrow. "That's surprisingly generous for Richard." Catherine laughed bitterly. "It's not generosity, it's terror. He's convinced that if I go public with the details of his affair, he'll never work in finance again." Apparently, your little revelation at the party has already cost him 3 job interviews. Has it? Oh, yes. Word travels fast in the investment world. No firm wants to hire someone who made national headlines for using company resources to fund an affair with his subordinate. She sipped her coffee, her hands trembling slightly. He's been blacklisted from every major financial institution on the West Coast. I made a mental note to send thank you cards to several of my contacts in the banking industry. But here's the thing, Catherine continued. He doesn't just want my silence about the affair. He wants me to help him rehabilitate his image. Public appearances, joint statements about working through our difficulties, maybe even couples therapy sessions with friendly journalists present. And what did you tell him? I told him I'd consider it if he could answer one question honestly. Which was? Catherine's expression hardened. I asked him if he ever loved me, or if our entire 23-year marriage was just another business arrangement he was managing. I waited. He couldn't answer, she said quietly. He stood there for 10 minutes trying to come up with something that would sound convincing, and he couldn't answer a simple question about whether he'd ever actually loved me. We sat in silence for a moment. I'm filing for divorce today, Catherine said finally. And I'm keeping the private investigator's report about his affair with your sister as insurance. If Richard ever tries to rehabilitate his reputation by blaming me for our marriage problems, I'll make sure every gory detail becomes public record. After Catherine left, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Richard's desperation had just cost him his last chance at salvaging anything from the wreckage of his life. But the most pathetic display of desperation came from an unexpected source. Tuesday afternoon, Monica buzzed my intercom with barely contained excitement. Ms. Rothford, you have a call from someone claiming to be from the Dr. Phil show. They want to book you for an episode about family betrayal and public revenge. I almost choked on my coffee. I'm sorry, what? Apparently the video from your engagement party has gone viral. Someone posted it on TikTok with the caption, "Sister steals fiancé gets destroyed by receipts," and it has over 2 million views. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up TikTok. Sure enough, there was a professionally edited video of Saturday night's confrontation, complete with dramatic music and text overlays highlighting the key moments. The comments section was filled with thousands of people calling me a queen and demanding updates on what happened to the cheating sister and her married boyfriend. Ma'am, Monica's voice brought me back to reality. Should I tell Dr. Phil you're not interested? Definitely not interested. But Monica? Start keeping a list of these requests. I have a feeling we're going to get more of them. I wasn't wrong. By the end of the week, I'd been contacted by 3 different reality TV shows, 2 podcast hosts, a documentary filmmaker, and someone claiming to represent Netflix about the rights to my story. But the most revealing call came Friday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. Delilah? The voice was Celeste's, but she sounded different, hollow, defeated. Where are you calling from? Las Vegas. I'm working at a casino here, in customer service. I leaned back in my chair. How did you get to Las Vegas? I sold my car. It was the only thing I had left that Marcus Chen's people couldn't touch. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Delilah, I need you to know something about the TV show requests you've been getting. What about them? I called them, all of them. I've been trying to sell our story, to get someone to pay me for an interview about what really happened. Even after everything, her opportunism still managed to surprise me. And they all said the same thing. They're only interested in talking to you. Nobody wants to hear from the villain of the story. There was a long pause. I destroyed everything, didn't I? Yes, I said simply. You did. I'm sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix anything, Celeste. Sorry doesn't change the choices you made. The call ended there, and I realized that this was probably the last time I would ever speak to my sister. The desperation phase was finally over. 3 months after the engagement party heard quote, 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 quote of the collapse became beautifully, devastatingly clear. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when Monica brought me the morning edition of the Seattle Business Journal, folded open to a particular article that made me smile with genuine satisfaction. Blackthorn Maritime files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, read the headline in bold black letters. The accompanying photo showed Theodore Sr. leaving the federal courthouse, his face a mask of barely contained fury and humiliation. The article detailed how the loss of the Belltown Harbor contract had triggered a cascade of financial problems that ultimately brought down one of Seattle's oldest shipping families. Without the $47 million development project, Blackthorn Maritime couldn't meet its loan obligations on the new cargo vessels they'd purchased in anticipation of expanded operations. The banks had called in their debts, suppliers had demanded payment, and employees had started jumping ship to competitors. Theodore Jr. wasn't mentioned in the article, but I knew from my sources that he'd been completely cut off from the family business and was currently working as a junior account manager at a small real estate firm in Tacoma. The Blackthorn name, once synonymous with maritime power and old Seattle money, had become synonymous with poor judgment and financial incompetence. But it was the smaller news items that truly illustrated how completely their world had crumbled. A brief mention in the Times Society section noted that Theodore Sr.'s wife had quietly filed for legal separation and moved to their daughter's home in Portland. The family estate on Bainbridge Island was listed for sale at a price 30% below its assessed value, a clear sign of desperation selling. Most satisfying of all was a tiny item buried in the business section's bankruptcy notices. Blackthorn, Theodore III, individual voluntary petition filed, King County Superior Court. My former fiancé, the man who had once bragged about his family's century-long financial legacy, had been forced to declare personal bankruptcy at age 34. The phone rang as I was savoring this particular detail. "Delilah, it's Catherine." Her voice was stronger now, more confident than it had been during our last conversation. "I thought you'd want to know. Richard's latest attempt at employment just fell through." "Another investment firm?" "A boutique wealth management company in Portland. He made it through 3 rounds of interviews before they discovered the Seattle Times articles about our divorce proceedings." Catherine's laugh held genuine amusement now. Apparently their major clients include several prominent Seattle families who specifically requested that Richard Vancroft never be allowed anywhere near their accounts. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the irony. How is Richard handling the rejection? He's moved back in with his elderly mother in Spokane. At 52 years old, he's living in his childhood bedroom and helping her with her grocery shopping because that's literally the only job he can find. Catherine paused. "His mother called me last week to apologize for his behavior. Sweet woman, she was mortified when she learned what he'd done." "And the divorce settlement?" "Finalized yesterday. I got everything I asked for, plus alimony for 15 years. Richard's lawyer tried to argue that the amount was excessive, but the judge took one look at the private investigator's report and ruled that Richard's conduct warranted punitive financial consequences. After hanging up, I pulled out a file I'd been tracking for months, a comprehensive dossier on all 3 of my former tormentors. The updates made for fascinating reading. Richard's professional destruction had been swift and absolute. The financial industry, built on trust and reputation, had no tolerance for executives who made headlines for all the wrong reasons. His LinkedIn profile, once listing decades of impressive accomplishments, now showed a gap of 8 months since his termination from Meridian Holdings. The few companies that had initially considered hiring him quickly changed their minds once they realized the liability his presence would create with clients and board members. Theodore's fall had been equally spectacular, but more personally devastating. His father's decision to completely exile him from Blackthorn Maritime had sent a clear message to Seattle's business community. Theodore was toxic, unreliable, and not worth the risk. The real estate firm that had eventually hired him was a struggling operation that specialized in low-income housing, hardly the luxury development work he'd been groomed for his entire life. But it was Celeste's trajectory that proved most illuminating about her true character. I'd hired a discreet private investigator to track her movements, partly for my own safety and partly out of morbid curiosity. The reports painted a picture of someone completely unable to learn from their mistakes. After fleeing to Las Vegas, Celeste had lasted exactly 6 weeks at the casino customer service job before being fired for showing up late repeatedly and allegedly flirting with high-roller clients in violation of company policy. She'd then attempted to launch an OnlyFans account, apparently believing her beauty would translate into easy money online. That venture had failed within a month, when she discovered that building a successful online presence required the same work ethic and consistency that had eluded her in every other area of life. The private investigator's most recent report indicated she was currently working at a chain restaurant in Phoenix, serving tables and living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates. The gambling debts that had driven her desperate schemes in the first place remained unpaid. Marcus Chen's collection agency had eventually sold her debt to a larger firm, which meant Celeste would be dealing with collection calls and credit damage for years to come. But the most revealing detail came from a series of social media posts the investigator had screenshotted. Celeste had started a blog called Learning to Rebuild, where she documented her journey of personal growth and accountability. The posts were exercises in creative self-deception. According to Celeste's version of events, she had been caught up in a toxic pattern of seeking validation from men and had made mistakes while struggling with gambling addiction. The engagement party confrontation was described as a wake-up call that forced me to examine my choices and commit to positive change. Nowhere in any of her posts did she acknowledge that she had deliberately and systematically betrayed the one person who had always protected her. Nowhere did she admit that her gambling debts had driven her to target specific men for financial exploitation. Nowhere did she take responsibility for the lives she had destroyed in pursuit of easy money. Instead, she positioned herself as a victim of circumstances, a woman who had lost her way, but was now finding her authentic self through adversity. The comments on her posts were telling. A handful of supportive messages from strangers, but notably absent were responses from anyone who had actually known her before the scandal. The blog's most recent entry, posted just 3 days ago, included a photograph of Celeste in her restaurant uniform, smiling brightly as she held a small trophy. The caption read, "Employee of the Month, proof that hard work and dedication pay off. #new beginnings, #growth mindset, #never give up." I stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to reconcile the woman in the picture with the sister who had kissed my fiancé in front of 300 people just to watch me suffer. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Even now, even after losing everything, Celeste remained fundamentally incapable of genuine self-reflection. The trophy represented perhaps 2 weeks of showing up on time and following basic instructions, behavior that most adults managed without celebration. Yet she presented it as evidence of her transformation, her commitment to change, her newfound work ethic. It was perhaps the most revealing insight into Celeste's psychology I'd ever encountered. She genuinely believed that performing the bare minimum requirements of adult responsibility deserved recognition and praise. She saw herself as heroically overcoming adversity rather than simply experiencing the natural consequences of her own choices. My intercom buzzed, pulling me back to the present. "Ms. Rothford, you have a call from Rebecca Martinez at Seattle Metropolitan Magazine. She says it's about their annual Women Who Lead feature." I glanced at my calendar, noting the meeting with potential investors scheduled for 2 o'clock and the charity board dinner that evening. My life had not just recovered from the engagement party scandal, it had flourished. Rothford Properties was having its most successful year ever. I'd been elected to the boards of 3 major charities, and Seattle Metropolitan was apparently considering me for their annual profile of influential business women. "Tell Ms. Martinez I'll call her back this afternoon," I said, closing the file on my former tormentors. "I have more important things to focus on right now." The collapse was complete, but my rise was just beginning. 18 months after the engagement party that changed everything, I was signing the final contracts for Rothford Properties' largest development project to date, when Monica knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before, uncertainty mixed with something that might have been sympathy. "Ms. Rothford," she said carefully, "there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says she's your sister." I looked up from the contracts, my pen hovering over the signature line. "My sister is in Phoenix." "Ma'am, I think you should see her." The woman who entered my office bore little resemblance to the Celeste who had destroyed my engagement party. Gone was the designer wardrobe, the perfect hair, the confident stride that had once commanded attention in every room she entered. This version of my sister wore a simple black dress that looked like it came from Target, minimal makeup that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion in her eyes, and carried herself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "Hello, Delilah," she said quietly, stopping just inside the doorway as if waiting for permission to come closer. I set down my pen and studied her with the same clinical detachment I might use to evaluate a potential business partner. "Celeste, you're a long way from Phoenix." "I flew in this morning, used my tip money from the restaurant." She gestured to the chair across from my desk. "May I sit?" I nodded, curious despite myself. "I want to start by saying that I don't expect anything from you," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I'm not here to ask for money, or help, or forgiveness. I'm here because my therapist says I need to make amends to the people I've hurt, and you're at the top of that list." "Your therapist?" "Dr. Sarah Kim at the Community Mental Health Center in Phoenix. I've been seeing her twice a week for the past year." Celeste reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. "She suggested I write down what I wanted to say so I wouldn't get defensive or make excuses." I leaned back in my chair, fascinated by this development. "Please go ahead." Celeste opened the notebook, and I could see pages of handwritten text in her familiar script. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Delilah, what I did to you was inexcusable. Not just the affair with Theodore, not just the public humiliation, but the systematic betrayal of your trust over months while you supported me and believed in me." She paused, taking a breath. "I manipulated Richard's feelings to get closer to Theodore. I used information from his office to track your movements and manufacture quote-quote coincidental meetings. I planned to destroy your relationship and steal your fiancé, and I did it all while pretending to be your loving sister." I said nothing, waiting. "But the worst part," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "was that I enjoyed it. I enjoyed thinking I was smarter than you, that I was finally taking something you valued. I was jealous of your success, your independence, your ability to build something meaningful, and instead of working to build my own life, I decided to tear down yours." She looked up from her notebook, meeting my eyes for the first time. "There's no excuse for that. No trauma, no addiction, no circumstance that makes what I did acceptable. I was an adult who made conscious choices to hurt the person who had been kindest to me my entire life." The office was quiet, except for the distant sounds of Seattle traffic 20 floors below. "The gambling debts were real," she continued, "but they weren't the reason I targeted Theodore and Richard. I targeted them because I wanted to prove I could take them from you. The money was just a bonus I hoped would solve my other problems." I found myself genuinely surprised by her honesty. This was not the Celeste I had known, the woman who had spent her entire life crafting narratives that painted her as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. "What changed?" I asked. "Rock bottom," she said simply. 6 months ago I was evicted from my apartment in Phoenix. I'd been fired from 3 jobs in a row for various reasons. Showing up late, attitude problems, trying to date customers. I ended up sleeping in my car for 2 weeks. She closed the notebook and looked directly at me, One night, I was sitting in a 24-hour diner at 3 in the morning, trying to make a cup of coffee last 4 hours because I had nowhere else to go, and I overheard these two women talking about their families. One of them was saying how grateful she was that her sister had helped her through nursing school, how she could never repay that kindness. Celeste's voice cracked slightly, and I realized I'd had that. I'd had someone who would have helped me through anything, who had already helped me through everything, and I'd thrown it away for, what? A man who didn't actually love me? Money I was too irresponsible to keep? The momentary satisfaction of thinking I'd won some competition that existed only in my head? So you went to therapy. So I went to therapy, started with the free clinic, eventually found Dr. Kim through a program for people with gambling addictions. She helped me understand that I'd been living my entire life as if other people were NPCs in a video game where I was the main character. Like your feelings, your relationships, your achievements were just props in my story. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected development. How long have you been sober from gambling? 14 months. I attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week. I have a sponsor, Sarah, who's been clean for 5 years. Celeste pulled out her phone and showed me an app. This tracks my sobriety, 427 days. And work? I'm still at the restaurant, but I got promoted to shift supervisor last month. It's not glamorous, but I show up on time, I do my job, and I'm learning that there's actually satisfaction in being reliable. She smiled ruefully. Novel concept for me. Why come here now? Why not write a letter? Because, she said, Dr. Kim helped me understand that true accountability means facing the people you've hurt, not hiding behind written words. And because I wanted you to see that I'm different now. Not asking you to trust me, not asking for a relationship, just wanting you to know that your sister isn't completely irredeemable. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculated charm that had always been her trademark. What I saw instead was something I'd never seen from Celeste before: genuine humility. I've also been working with a financial counselor, she continued. I'm on a payment plan for the gambling debts. It'll take me 4 more years to pay them off completely, but Marcus Chen's agency agreed to the terms. No more collectors calling, no more threats. 4 years is a long time. It is. But Dr. Kim says that's part of accountability. Living with the long-term consequences of your choices, instead of looking for shortcuts or someone else to fix them. She stood up, smoothing down her simple dress. I should go. I have a red-eye flight back to Phoenix tonight, and I need to be at work tomorrow morning. Celeste, I said as she reached the door, thank you for coming, for being honest. She turned back, tears in her eyes. Delilah, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I need you to know something. What happened at your engagement party was the worst thing I've ever done. But it wasn't the worst thing that could have happened to you. Theodore would have cheated eventually. Richard would have found some other young woman to exploit. You deserved better than both of them. I know. And I need you to know that watching you handle that night with such grace and strength was the first time in my life I was genuinely proud to be your sister, even though I was the one destroying everything. She paused at the door. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even think I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost, and I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry about the consequences, but truly sorry for hurting someone who deserved so much better from me. After she left, I sat alone in my office for an hour, staring out at Elliott Bay and thinking about redemption, accountability, and the strange possibility that people could actually change. For the first time in 18 months, I found myself wondering if my sister might actually become someone worth knowing. 2 years after the engagement party that was supposed to celebrate my future with Theodore Blackthorne III, I stood on the stage of the Grand Astoria ballroom, the very same venue where my world had been publicly shattered and then spectacularly rebuilt. This time, however, I was here for the Seattle Business Council's annual Women Who Lead Awards ceremony, where I was being honored as Entrepreneur of the Year. The irony was not lost on me as I looked out at an audience of 500 of Seattle's most influential business leaders, many of whom had witnessed my supposed humiliation 24 months earlier. Tonight, they were applauding my success. 3 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the same acoustic space where Celeste had once announced her affair to a shocked crowd. Rothford Properties was a respected but relatively small development firm. Today, we're the largest woman-owned construction company in the Pacific Northwest, with projects spanning from Vancouver to Portland and a workforce of over 300 employees. Polite applause rippled through the audience. I could see familiar faces in the crowd, business partners, competitors, former friends of Theodore's family. Some looked genuinely pleased for my success. Others seemed to be calculating how they might benefit from an association with my rising star. But tonight I don't want to talk about buildings or profit margins or market expansion, I continued, my tone becoming more personal. I want to talk about resilience, about the unexpected gifts that sometimes come wrapped in our most painful experiences. I paused, letting my eyes scan the ballroom where crystal chandeliers cast the same warm light that had illuminated my betrayal. 2 years ago, in this very room, I learned something invaluable about human nature. I learned that some people will smile to your face while plotting your destruction. I learned that trust, once broken, reveals the true character of everyone involved. And I learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing that happens to you. The audience was completely silent now, understanding that they were hearing something more personal than the usual corporate success story. That night, I discovered that my fiancé had been having an affair with my sister. I discovered that a respected business leader had been manipulating his employee and betraying his family. I discovered that someone I had protected and supported my entire life saw me not as a sister to love, but as a target to exploit. I could see people in the audience shifting uncomfortably, probably remembering that infamous evening and wondering how much detail I planned to share. But I also discovered something about myself. I discovered that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I discovered that I had built not just a business, but a network of relationships based on mutual respect and genuine trust. I discovered that when everything I thought I could count on fell apart, what remained was my own integrity, my own capabilities, and my own worth. The applause started slowly this time, but built steadily as the audience recognized the courage it took to transform personal devastation into professional triumph. Rothford Properties succeeded not despite that betrayal, but because of it. When I stopped investing my energy in relationships built on convenience and social expectations, when I stopped enabling people who took my support for granted, when I stopped accepting less than I deserved, that's when I found the focus and determination to build something truly extraordinary. I pulled out my phone and displayed a photograph on the large screens flanking the stage. It showed the completed Belltown Harbor development. 47 stories of luxury condominiums and commercial space overlooking Elliott Bay, with the Rothford Properties logo prominently displayed. This building stands where Theodore Blackthorne thought his project would be built. When I canceled our partnership and found new collaborators who shared my vision and values, we created something more beautiful and more profitable than the original plan. Sometimes you have to tear down the old foundation to build something better. More enthusiastic applause now, as the business audience appreciated both the metaphor and the practical success it represented. But the most important lesson I learned wasn't about business at all. It was about the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between accountability and excuses, between genuine change and performative apologies. I thought about Celeste's visit 6 months earlier, about the woman who had sat across from my desk with a notebook full of honest admissions and a hard-earned understanding of consequences. Real accountability isn't about saying sorry. It's about accepting responsibility for your choices and living with the results without expecting others to minimize your consequences or pretend the harm never happened. Real change isn't about explanations or justifications. It's about consistent, sustained, different behavior over time. And real strength isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about building a life so fulfilling that the people who betrayed you become irrelevant to your happiness. I paused to take a sip of water, gathering my thoughts for the conclusion. I've been asked many times over the past 2 years whether I regret how I handled that evening, whether I think I was too harsh, too calculated, too unforgiving. My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret that it was effective. Theodore Blackthorne taught me that I deserved a partner who chose me actively and enthusiastically, not someone who saw me as a safe backup plan while he explored other options. Richard Vancroft taught me the importance of due diligence in both business and personal relationships. And my sister Celeste taught me that love without boundaries isn't actually love at all. It's enabling. I looked out at the crowd, many of whom were now nodding appreciatively. Today, Rothford Properties has partnerships with some of the most innovative firms in the country. We've created affordable housing initiatives that have provided homes for over 1,000 families. We've employed local contractors, supported minority-owned businesses, and proven that you can be both profitable and principled. The screens now showed a montage of Rothford Properties projects, affordable housing complexes, community centers, green building initiatives, job training programs we'd funded. More importantly, I've built a life surrounded by people who earn my trust through their actions, who support my success without trying to diminish it, and who understand that real relationships are built on mutual respect rather than mutual need. I thought about my team at Rothford Properties, about the board positions I held, about the genuine friendships I'd cultivated with people who valued integrity over convenience. To the young women in the audience tonight, I want you to know this. You don't have to accept betrayal gracefully. You don't have to minimize your own worth to protect other people's feelings. You don't have to forgive people who aren't genuinely sorry or pretend that trust can be rebuilt without evidence of change. You have the right to expect better. You have the power to demand better. And you have the strength to build better, even when, especially when people you trusted try to tear down what you've created. I raised the Crystal Award I'd been presented earlier in the evening. This award represents more than business success. It represents the power of choosing yourself when everyone else chooses convenience. It represents the strength that comes from building something real instead of accepting something false. And it represents the absolute truth that the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. Thank you. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes. As I left the stage and walked through the same ballroom where my engagement party had ended in scandal, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the betrayal that had forced me to discover my own strength. Gratitude for the humiliation that had motivated me to build something extraordinary. Gratitude for the losses that had made room for gains I never could have imagined. The champagne reception afterward was filled with congratulations, business cards, and investment opportunities. Seattle's elite wanted to associate themselves with my success, to partner with my company, to bask in the reflected glory of someone who had turned personal devastation into professional triumph. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the evening, when Monica approached me with a small envelope. "This was delivered to the office yesterday," she said quietly. "The return address is Phoenix." Inside was a simple card with a photograph of Celeste in a graduation cap and gown, standing next to an older woman I didn't recognize. The message, written in my sister's familiar handwriting, was brief. "Delilah, I graduated from the community college's business program yesterday. Dr. Kim says I'm ready to stop attending therapy twice a week and transition to monthly check-ins. I'm applying for management trainee positions at several restaurant chains. I wanted you to know that I'm still working to become someone worthy of being your sister. Maybe someday that will be enough. Celeste." I slipped the card into my purse and walked out of the Grand Astoria ballroom for the second time in 2 years. This time, I was walking toward a future I had built entirely on my own terms, surrounded by people who had earned their place in my life, carrying the absolute certainty that I would never again accept less than I deserved. The woman who had dropped that champagne glass 2 years ago would barely recognize the person I had become, and that, I realized, was exactly the point. Sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the greatest freedoms. Sometimes the worst nights lead to the best years. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up giving you exactly what you need to discover who you were always meant to be. The champagne glass didn't shatter when I dropped it that night, but everything else did. And from those pieces, I built something infinitely more beautiful and unbreakably strong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.